Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ for our 5-minute Bible study series. We are back after about a 2-week break. You'll notice the scenery has somewhat changed. Well, it's changed quite a bit. That's because my wife and I moved. That was the reason for the break. I do have some sad news maybe for some of you, and that is that the rooster is gone. He will not be interrupting my videos anymore because I ate him. Actually, no. It's because we left him on another continent. And I am not sad about that at all. So anyway, for those of you who love the rooster and left comments, if you need to reminisce about him, you can go watch those old videos. But as for now, let's talk about 1 Kings chapter 17. We're going to be introduced to a new character today, a new historical figure, prophet of the Israelite people, and that is the famous prophet Elijah. As always, there's a free PDF that you can download on our website, and it starts off with our when section. When did these events happen in history? According to the timeline that we've been using, the nations of Israel in the north and Judah in the south divided after the reign of King Solomon during the days of his son, Rehoboam. That was about 975 BC. This is the period, the next several centuries, that we call the period of the divided kingdom. Today, we're going about 80 to 100 years after the kingdom divided. We're going to talk about a king, a very wicked king named Ahab. He reigned for 22 years over Israel in the north. That would be from approximately 920 BC to 890 BC, somewhere within that time window. And again, we are using general approximate round numbers for our dates because the dating does get pretty complicated. As far as the key figures in this chapter, we have this king named Ahab. We've introduced him before. He was Omri's son, and he was one of the most wicked, if not the most wicked king that Israel ever had. He was married to an equally wicked woman, and her name is, do you know? Jezebel. Yes, the infamous Jezebel from the Bible. We're going to talk about Elijah. Again, Elijah is God's prophet who God used to announce judgments against Ahab and against Israel when they were wicked. Our third key figure is a widow. We don't actually know her name. She's generally known as the widow of Zarephath. She was a poor widow who lived with her son, and she fed Elijah during a famine, and Elijah is going to raise her son from the dead in this chapter. As far as our map, we have quite a few places to talk about, new places that we haven't highlighted a lot before. First of all is Tirzah and Samaria. The kings of Israel lived in Tirzah before Omri, Ahab's father, built Samaria, and then that became the capital. Elijah was from Gilead. Gilead, if you look to the right side of the Jordan River over in the territory of northern Gad or the southern part of eastern Manasseh, you'll see Gilead. It's a region, not a city. That's where Elijah was from. Now, Elijah had to hide from Ahab in this chapter, and he hid east of the Jordan River at a place called the Cherith Brook. But nobody knows exactly where the Cherith Brook was. After leaving the Cherith Brook, God sent Elijah to Zarephath, which is way up north, almost all the way at the top of the map. The only more northern point is the city of Damascus. Zarephath was about 13 miles north of the city of Tyre. Okay, so that takes us over to our outline section. Verses 1 through 6 is our first section. Elijah prophesies a drought and is fed by ravens. So this should be interesting. God had this prophet named Elijah, and he sent Elijah to Ahab, the king of Israel, with a message. God was going to dry up the land of Israel and cause it not to rain for several years. This was going to be a punishment on the nation of Israel and their king for their wickedness. During this time of no rain, God told Elijah to go to the east side of the Jordan River to the Cherith Brook, and God was going to provide for him there. At the brook, God cared for Elijah in unique ways. He had the brook, obviously, for water. God caused ravens to bring Elijah food in the morning and in the evening. Having seen a few ravens in my lifetime, I would have some questions about the hygiene of that food, but I think God probably took care of that. Okay, section number 2, verses 7 through 16. The widow and her son Zarephath make bread for Elijah. So when the Cherith Brook dried up eventually, because there wasn't any rain, God told Elijah to go to Zarephath, and there was a woman who he would meet there, a widow who would take care of him. When he arrived at the gate of Zarephath, he found a widow, and he asked her to bring him some water and some bread. And she responded that she didn't hardly have anything. She had basically enough bread and enough oil to make one last meal for her and her son, but then they were going to die because they didn't have anything else. Elijah made an interesting request. He said, well, I know you only have a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. How about you make me food first, and then I'll make you a promise. He says, if you do this, God will provide for you, and your jar of flour and your jug of oil will never run out after that. Right? So this is kind of a test of faith for this woman. Elijah could just be bluffing and getting a meal and then letting them starve. But if you're familiar with Elijah's character, you'll know that he wasn't lying. She, to her credit, did as the prophet told her to do, and God made Elijah's word come true. All throughout the famine, until the rain returned to Israel, her jar of flour never ran out. God refilled it miraculously, and the same for her jug of oil. Now our final section, verses 17 through 24, Elijah raises the widow's son from the dead. So one day the widow's son became very sick and died. Elijah carried the boy up to the upper part of the house and laid him on his bed. He then stretched himself out over the body 3 times, and he prayed that God would raise the child. God acknowledged Elijah's plea, his prayer, and the boy was given his life back. When his mother saw him alive, she said to Elijah, quote, now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true. So that is 1 Kings chapter 17. Thanks for joining me. That's our introduction to the prophet Elijah. We're going to be talking about him for a couple chapters. But before we leave, as we always do, let's talk about our application. What can we take away from this chapter? One thing I observed in this was that there's nothing traditional about the way that God provided for his prophet in this chapter. And that's interesting. I think there's something that we can learn from it. First, God had birds bring Elijah food, and that's how he was fed. And then second, he sent him to a woman who was too poor even to feed herself, and he used her and her house miraculously to care for his prophet during the famine. So here's the application. When we find ourselves in a tight spot, in a predicament, and we can't see a traditional solution to our problem, we can't see how the thing is going to get fixed, can't see the path forward, think back to stories like this and remember that God works in all kinds of mysterious ways. He has more ways than we can even imagine to get things done. And I think the longer you live, the longer you put your trust in God, the more times you experience this. Is like where you don't necessarily see how something is going to be resolved. And then God works it out in a way that you wouldn't even have thought about. So have faith, like the poor widow who fed Elijah before herself, trusting that God's words would come true.